feed sheds. In the center of the hamlet there was a large, round, functioning water trough dedicated to the Grand Army of the Republic. It stood across from the lowest level of the community building. Water ran in this trough for many years, even after nearly all the horses and wagons had departed. Of course, taller dogs were very happy the water continued to flow. But in the early 30s, most of the horse teams were gone. The exception was Mr. Reedy's horse and wagon. Once a week, the old man would come into the village to shop. He always tethered his horse right next to the butcher shop. Everyone thought Mr. Reedy owned this space because it was the only space he ever used. Moreover, no one else ever parked there. After completing his shopping, he would put his groceries in his wagon, untie his horse, and mount his wagon. With several clicks of his tongue and a pull of the reins to the left, the horse would start its turn. Halfway through the turn, the old horse would stop and get a drink at the trough. Doing this, the horse and wagon completely blocked the main street of the village. This action tied up motor traffic for several minutes, but no one seemed to care, and no one ever honked his or her horn. Everyone expected this, and accepted it, as they accepted the gates of the railroad crossing. After all, Old Man Reedy had been doing this long before automobiles came on the scene, so it was his right to continue it. Shortly after Mr. Reedy left, the English sparrows would descend. My dad once said this was the only solid proof he knew of the adage, two could live as cheaply as one. The other exceptions were the horse and trade wagons of the Iceman and the door-to-door butcher, Mr. Loomis, who was an arch rival of the butcher shop owner, Mr. Stark, both in commerce and politics. This rivalry was verbally renewed each time the door-to-door butcher stopped at the trough to water his horse. Their voices could be heard all over the center of the village. After the 1936 FDR landslide, all of this stopped abruptly. The door-to-door butcher bought a truck and avoided this village center. Many of the town folk missed some of the liveliest, loudest political discussions they had ever heard. But to the kids, the Iceman was their favorite. He always let you take a piece of ice, chipped off when he cut down the large blocks to icebox size. Boy, did those ice chips cool you off fast on a hot summer's day. In such a small village, about 700 people, you knew just about everyone by their first names. You also knew a lot about them, some of it factual and some not. But what was most important, everyone was a separate and distinct personality. Living in Backwash in those years, it seemed to me, Backwash probably had more characters per capita than any village of its size in America. It was impossible to stereotype Backwash people. The town was made up of what might be termed Yankees. Several families did date back to the founding of the town in the 1640s. Most of the people were more recently arrived Yankees: English, Irish, Scotch, Welsh, French, both Canadian and European, Italian, Polish, Dutch, Scandinavians, and 2.5 Afro-American families. The half was a mixed marriage family, which everyone accepted without question. What probably contributed most to this democratic acceptance of others was that there were no ethnic neighborhoods in the village. Every street had a variety of races and nationalities living side by side. Backwash, however, was not a complete microcosm of America. There were no Jews or Asian Americans living in the village during this time. In Backwash, almost everyone had a nickname, which they either accepted or in some cases tried to ignore. The local reporter for the neighboring city newspaper, of course, was called Scoop. Two cousins, one Beans, the other Poop. Snooky, Rabbit, Rocky, long before Marciano. Snapper, Prunes, Cuckoo, Ding, Stump, Hoot, Slugger, Dinah. Pronounced Dinah, who was a male with a huge appetite. Buddy, Shanks, and so forth. In the town, there were many families that lived for generations. Rivalry and a few minor feuds were part of the community fabric. One of the longest rivalries was between two of the grocery store owners. One was Irish and a declared Democrat, the other a Scot and a staunch Republican. Their long battle was over which store would house the branch post office. The post office really made a great difference for a small village store owner. It was a question of mere survival or affluence. In those days, the store owner's party affiliation was critical to selection. George, the Scot, had had the post office since Harding became president. Dick, the Irishman, had been shut out. He lived in the hope that the next election would bring a change in things. Dick had felt the candidacy of Al Smith, both a Democrat and Irish, would end his waiting. Dick's hopes were dashed by Hoover's 1928 election victory. In 1932, Dick worked hard at the local level to support Franklin D. Roosevelt, which was a very hard going as there were only 4 registered Democrats in the entire village. Dick, Mr. Stark, the butcher shop owner, and my parents. There were around 40 or so independents, most of whom were actually Democrats. These shadow Democrats chose not to declare themselves in the rock-ribbed Republican backwash. With FDR's first victory, the post office was moved into Dick's small store. George, with tearful eyes, helped to make it a smooth transition, but with all-abiding faith that things would return to normal in 1936. With the 1936 Democratic landslide, George was severely shaken, as were many others in the village. But he was determined to hang on until 1940, when without doubt the Republicans would return to power. However, even the large autographed picture of Wendell Willkie, the 1940 GOP standard bearer, which George displayed proudly on the wall behind the cash register, did not affect the outcome. Shortly after the 1940 election, George closed his little store and gave up. He got a job uptown. Backwash people always referred to the true center of the larger township, which included Backwash and Lower Backwash, as uptown. Sadly, George never returned to the grocery business. As Dad often said, there is never a good wind that doesn't bring some bad. Everyone liked George, and most of the Backwash voters had done their part for George. But unfortunately for George, their concentrated votes of Backwash were not enough to swing the national election. For many during the Depression, the primary means of transportation was the railroad. Cars were expensive. Many people could not afford them. Our family was truly lucky. Mom and Dad had railroad passes, which meant free transportation to and from work, as well as for shopping in Boston and other nearby cities. In fact, our family did not own a car until after I entered college. Train schedules were good, the trains ran on time, and my parents had passes. Who needed a car? Dad commuted to Boston by train every working day. He had to leave home around 1:15 p.m. to be on the job in the railroad yards by 3 p.m. He would catch the last train out of Boston, arriving in Backwash at 12:40 a.m. the next day. He did this 6 days a week, 7 days a week during the Second World War. On the train, he read, and with over an hour and a half available for his favorite pastime, he covered a great deal of material. When he read something of great interest, he would share it with the family. When Mom tired of his usually one-way talks, he would continue with me. This all started when I was very young. I learned to be a good listener. I had no choice. Dad covered a great variety of subjects. I especially liked history and politics. These talks continued until I left for college. Actually, Dad's talks helped me a great deal in public school and even in college. The subjects covered were varied, topical, and usually quite interesting. I remember a great deal of what he said, and would later in school dumbfound my teachers and classmates with a wide range of information I gladly shared in class. This helped in another way. I had a slight learning disability. It took me a great deal of time and effort to read, while Dad's talks supplied me with a vast reservoir of information. In the eyes of teachers, I was a smart kid, even though I did not read very much on my own until the 4th grade. Recently, a national newsman commented on the problem of education in the U.S. He did not blame the teachers, the schools, and the textbooks for the lack of true learning being conveyed in our schools. He said today's parents were at fault for not providing their children the time, direction, and motivation necessary to make learning really important in their lives. My dad did give me the time and extended the effort to help me learn. His talks developed within me an abiding interest in learning. His continuing interest helped me greatly throughout public school, college, and graduate school. I wanted to be knowledgeable enough to sit down someday and give Dad a talk. This never actually happened, but we now have conversations where I get a chance to speak at least some of the time. My early years in Backwash, living in the little house, were great ones. One winter, Dad and an older neighbor boy, Ernie, built an igloo in our backyard. Dad had read about Eskimos and their culture. He was fascinated by igloos, dwellings of ice and snow that would keep you warm. He wanted to build one. He read a book that provided detailed description of Eskimo building methods. In our New England winter provided the necessary building material. After a storm which left around 24 or more inches of snow on the ground, Dad had just what he needed to build the igloo. He and Ernie worked very hard, cutting the blocks of crusted snow and fitting them together. I helped a little by chinking with snow where the blocks did not fit snugly. When the igloo was finished, it was a beauty. I had a great time playing in it, and yes, I found it much warmer in the igloo than it was outside. This beautiful copy of an Eskimo building lasted for nearly 2 weeks until an extended thaw made it unsafe. So I was restricted from playing in it. It was even sadder the day when the igloo finally collapsed, leaving a somewhat dirty, nondescript pile of melting snow. Please fast forward to the end of the tape. This completes tape 1.